First of all, I just want to introduce our esteemed guest, Mr. Howard Morgan, current vice chairman of B Capital, also previous founder of First Round Capital. We also have Mr. Professor Tony Chen, current president of KAUST, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia Technology University. Without further ado, I'd love to have both of you share a little bit story about yourself, just to give us overview of what have you, looked at in terms of latest investment trends, and also a little bit about your background, please.
Want Tony to start?
Sure, Tony, would you like to
Howard,
start?
you can start. Howard.
So I'm Howard Morgan. I am the chair of B Capital. I got here through like Tony, an academic career where I got a PhD in computer science before people knew there were computers in 1968, and then taught at Cornell and Caltech where Tony got some degrees, and then the University of Pennsylvania for a dozen years. 50 years ago next month, I got the pen on the internet, and we had machine number 50.
Wow.
So the next year I got the first spam ever sent. And have been involved ever since. In '82, I left my tenured faculty position. You want to take that down a little bit? Because I hear a lot of movement. Yeah. I left my tenured faculty position to start Renaissance Technologies with Jim Simons. We did quantitative investing as well as venture capital. At the end of 7 years, the quantitative investing was doing 38% IRR, and the venture was only 25%. So we took the venture out of Renaissance, and it's become the quant powerhouse that we always intended. And then I invested on my own for about a decade until one of my proteges, Josh Koppelman, who I had funded 2 companies with, said, "Gee, it's time for a seed stage fund," and we started First Round Capital. So in 2004 or 5, we started First Round Capital. I told him then I would do 10 years, and 10 years later, I said, okay, we did 10 years. Now it's going great. First Round is legendary and should be. And was approached by Eduardo Saverin, the Facebook co-founder, and Raj Ganguly to start B Capital Group, which is a global group. So the things that attracted me to B were the fact that First Round was only US, B Capital was global, headquartered in Singapore and LA, with offices now all over the country. That is to say New York, Miami, LA, San Francisco, and all over the world, which is to say Singapore, Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, Jakarta, Beijing, and Hong Kong.
Looks like we have 7 cities overlap.
a lot of overlap. And we invest globally, and we're very excited by what we're seeing. And that includes China, where there's some geopolitical issues, which is the topic of this panel. So we'll talk about those in a minute.
Great. Thanks, Howard. And Tony, could you please tell us more about your...
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, I'm not really a venture capitalist, although I do know a lot of people in the field, and I take personal interest in it. But anyway, I was born and brought up in Hong Kong. I left as a teenager. I went to the British school system, for those of you who know, O-level, A-level, and all that. But most of my education, all of my education, post-secondary education and life was spent in basically California, Los Angeles and the San Francisco Bay Area. So I went to undergrad at Caltech, and my PhD was in computer science at Stanford. Then I was in the East Coast. I worked at Yale computer science for 7 years. But most of my academic career was at the UCLA, where I was a professor and then became a dean. I did spend 3 years at the U.S. National Science Foundation. Those of you who know, they fund basic science research. And I was the head of math and physical sciences, astronomy, chemistry, math, and so on and so forth, which gave me a chance to get to know what the U.S. science and technology ecosystem is about, what the strengths and weaknesses are or were, but also international. I mean, the U.S. is so important in this field that, that position allowed me a chance to know. I give you an example. Howard and I know someone in common, which is Jim Simons, who's the founder of Renaissance. He's a legend in the math field. He was the chairman of the math department at Stony Brook Renaissance, if I understand, is still headquartered in Stony Brook, and I visited there once. I know some people at Sequoia on Sand Hill Road. My academic brother is a partner there. Michael Moritz got an honorary degree from HKUST, where I was a president for about a decade in Hong Kong. So maybe the last thing I want to say is KAUST it's like Caltech without undergrad. Maybe that's the simplest way. His ambition is to be Caltech. In fact, my predecessor as president was the president of Caltech. It is really interested in, of course, science and technology, as the name suggests, but also in innovation. In fact, we've always had a small, what we call KAUST Innovation Fund, something under $10 million a year that we fund our own startups. But starting about 2 months ago, we launched what we call a deep tech innovation fund. In fact, there's a name. It's called Capital K. So Capital K, the K could be KAUST, could be Saudi Arabia, could be capital, could be money, and uppercase K, all that interpretation. It's $200 million over 5 years to invest in deep tech. In fact, the GP is based in the San Francisco Bay Area. But of course, the intention is for the investment, but to make money so that it will renew itself, but also the investment to have something to do with Saudi Arabia. In other words, you can spin in companies, you can invest in companies in Saudi Arabia and in the region, encourage a talent flow between them, transfer of technology and all that. So that's a brief introduction. Thank you, Cathryn.
Great, thanks, Tony. Funny enough, I almost went to Caltech. This is kind of sad. Now it makes me want to do my choices. Okay, great. So we're gonna start a panel with the idea to talk about what exactly is happening right now, right? We already mentioned the whole U.S.-China debacle in previous panels a few times, but given you both have really decades of experience navigating such different worlds, also investing in such different worlds, how do you see, the current landscape, and where do you see, from 5-10 years later, where are we going to be, given, all this different news coming out, and also where is Saudi Arabia's role in today's world? A couple of days ago, I believe, Prince MBS basically had the first interview in English with Fox News, right? This is also pretty first time in history. So we would love to learn more from both of your perspectives. Where do you see the world go from here?
Well, clearly, the U.S.-China relations are at a low point from the left. We had a wonderful period of globalization, starting with China really in the early 2000s when China got admitted to the WTO. And that allowed the whole world to get the benefits of low-cost manufacturing.
Recording in progress.
Low-cost labor, etc. And it worked out well for pretty much everybody. And China was, from the U.S. point of view, liberalizing a little bit. It was opening up a little bit. It was, going in the right direction as far as the U.S. was concerned, because the U.S. had always felt that if you got these companies, the startups and all the tech startups and all the people connected, that maybe that people would want more democracy. Now, unfortunately, that's exactly what some of the Chinese Communist Party leadership did not want. And so when it got too far, when Jack Ma took the time to poke a finger in Xi Jinping's face just before the financial IPO was supposed to happen, they squashed down a lot of the technology companies, and they stifled some of the growth, and they started on the path that then COVID accelerated, which was a little bit of not really decoupling, because the economies are too interlinked to decouple, but a little bit more awareness of what areas in the strategic places we needed to be able to manufacture in other countries, not just the US, but many other countries. And that's kind of where we are now. And in the US, of course, the political rhetoric is such that both Democrats and Republicans can poke at China. Nobody can be their friend right now. Makes it very tough for investors. And so it is, and with more obstacles being thrown in the way, we now have President Biden's put out this thing that says, if you want to invest in China, you may have to tell us. If it gets anywhere close to something we think is strategic, national security related, we're going to stop it. It's a reverse CFIUS, and that's going to put a damper on some investing. We have 12 people in China at B Capital in running our China funds, but many of the U.S. investors are getting very skittish about the headline risk of saying that they've invested in China. So we're looking at that carefully.
Tony?
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I comment a little bit more first on the U.S.-China relationship before I come back to Saudi Arabia. I agree with everything that Howard has said. The relationship is at a low point. It has become more and more comprehensive. It started with some sanctions and trade and tech, and now basically it's everything. I don't think the situation will improve in any time in the near future. People told me, two sides of the house don't agree on anything except for China, except about China. So that will stay for a little bit longer, I'm afraid. The geopolitics, I'm usually an optimist, but I'm a little bit more pessimistic or less optimistic than before. I really worry about this Cold War may turn into a hot war, either in Taiwan Strait or even, near Korea. I hope that won't happen. I hope neither side will want to push the situation into this, in a way, to sit in this trap, cannot extricate themselves out of this. I really hope that won't happen. So the Cold War, if you will, that we're already in, certainly will hurt China for sure, but it will hurt the U.S. as well. The latest thing I've heard, I'm a tech guy. So I wrote an article last year, an op-ed called The Lose-Lose Tech War. As the title suggests, both sides lose. Let's take the example of the most recent thing, not the reverse CFIUS, which, it affects a lot of people, people in San Diego. You heard that, I know Sequoia a little bit. Sequoia is now split up, right, into 3 parts because of that, I think, indirectly. But it will, let's take the later example of semiconductors, chips, right? So, TSMC moving to Arizona, TSMC is also setting up plants in Europe. It will hurt China. Its supply chain is being severed. I don't know how it's going to cope, but the latest example we read is that this Huawei phone, the Mate 60 Pro, if I understand, somehow they were able to make this new chips with 5G capability. I don't have a version of it. So my point is this: if you look at history of sanctions, okay, on China, starting with building the atomic bomb, during Mao era, to supercomputers, to space, to whatever, all these areas of technology. Sanction, first of all, it hurts both sides, and second, it's like trying to stop water from flowing, in your room. It's actually very difficult to do. So that's a big gamble in a way, because we don't know where that's going to lead. Okay. Now, I don't always agree with the current administration, but I do agree with something that the Secretary of State Blinken said. I think if I quote him correctly, he said, we should compete with confidence, we should cooperate where we can, and we should contest where we must. So I speaking as an American, I definitely agree with that. If we only put those words into action, I think the whole world would be better. I think that's how I see it. Okay, so that's more general, U.S., China, geopolitics. But coming back to Saudi Arabia. So, I've been living in Saudi Arabia, leading KAUST for about 5 years. So I have more than a front row seat, okay, watching. I feel like I'm partially like an extra on stage, if you will, because I'm very much involved with some of the big changes in the kingdom just because of my position. So in particular, with respect to relationship between Saudi Arabia and China, over the last 9-10 months since President Xi Jinping's visit in December of last year, there's been enormous flow of people, organization, companies, maybe money too. I don't see that going between the two countries. To give you an example, so in June this year, there was the 10th Arabs China Business Forum. It was held in Riyadh. I don't know. I forgot whether Cathryn, you were there. I think you were there.
Yeah.
Right? I don't
we've seen each other in Riyadh quite a few times now.
Yeah. But anyway, that was only a few months ago, and I heard that there were like 3,500 participants and over 1,000 from China alone, and most of them are business. They're not government. Okay. And before that, in February, which is shortly after Xi's visit, the chief executive of Hong Kong led a delegation of about 60 to 70 people and visited Riyadh, hosted by the Ministry of Investment. Okay. And so there's a lot of pent-up demand. You may have heard of the FII, the Future Investment Initiative.
I believe Howard and I will both be there this year.
Be there, yeah.
Yeah, you'll be both be there. I'm on its board.
Yes.
But you may or may not know that it, like Davos, it has branched out. It had a meeting, a branch meeting in New York City last year. It had one in Miami this year. And this December, it's the first one outside those two would be in Hong Kong, hosted by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So it's not an accident that it's in Hong Kong, right? So there's a lot of interest in that part of the world. So this is the trend. Frankly, as we speak, we have many Saudi government people, ministers, and so on, visiting China, visiting Shenzhen in particular, you know, the Silicon Valley of China, if you will. I think this is what I read just in the last 2 or 3 days. Okay. I think the Saudi Minister of Industry and Mineral Resources was in Shenzhen. It's public. He visited Huawei. The Minister of Economy and Planning is also in China. I forgot where he was. Today, this morning, I got news that the Ministry of Tourism of Saudi Arabia announced that Saudi Arabia has achieved some sort of status within the Chinese tourism industry. So it's a designated good place to visit. That is Saudi Arabia. So they sent out this announcement. So I've always warned people in Saudi Arabia that just wait for the swarm of Chinese tourists coming to Saudi Arabia. It will sort of overwhelm the whole kingdom. But it looks like that may happen. So these are just indications. I think if I understand, you know, I spent a decade in Hong Kong leading HKUST, the university, so I know a lot of people in that part. And so I understand that there's the interest on both sides. It comes down to, first of all, money. So I think the perception and probably the reality is that in the Middle East, in particular, Saudi Arabia has a lot of money for investment. They have been traditionally, I would say majority has been invested in the US or in the West in general. But now I think they are looking to also diversify. They are trying to invest in the East, in China in particular. China also, the Chinese startups and companies are also looking for money because of this reverse CFIUS, right? How I mentioned, you know, so they are trying to look for alternative sources of funding. So Saudi Arabia, Middle East become very natural. So that's a sort of very natural thing. The other thing is markets. Saudi Arabia is not very big in terms of population. It's about 35 million people. But Saudi Arabia is the kind of like the spiritual leader of Islam, is the custodian of the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina. It's also a major Arab country. It's seen as the leader of the Arab world. So we take that population, it's at least over 1 billion people. Okay. So market is very important. Now, even for tech, which is my area, you often cultural language, background is key for investment. You cannot just take a product from one country, and just move and try to sell it and market it in another country. I think in the Arab and the Islamic world, that probably is true too. So you need a lot of talent, partnership, so that you will work together and have a product that is adapted to the local market. I think that's where the sweet spot is, to me.
Yeah.
In a way, yeah.
Tony, yeah.
Because let me finish with this.
Sure.
That is, if because I think there are a lot of tech people and VCs in the audience. Is this a good time to look into investment between Saudi Arabia and China? Because this is a good time if you know enough to understand the need of both the East and West. Because it's a little bit chaotic now. Nobody knows certainly about the future, but that's an opportunity, right? As the Chinese word said, right? A crisis is danger and opportunity. So this is where the people who really feel confident and know the right people can predict the future to some extent. This is a great opportunity. Yeah, you'll be the trend leader. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you, Tony. I mean, this is really a momentous time when we think about opportunities around the world, right? Both of us are investing in the East, both of us invest in the West. I know, Howard, your fund focuses on enterprise SaaS, especially emerging markets like India, Indonesia. We've done very little investment in India, but a lot of investment also in Southeast Asia. What opportunities do you see there that don't exist elsewhere? And what is it about these particular markets that make it attractive?
Well, India in particular, and we do a lot in India, has an emerging healthcare system. They don't have an EHR system. They don't have a lot of the other things, but they're starting to get digital health. COVID sped that up. So over the last decade, digital India means that 1 billion people in India, and India is now past China in population, 1 billion people have cell phones and with their bank accounts on the cell phone so they can transact. And they can also get health information. So we're seeing a lot of healthcare startups. We've done a few of those we think are important. The enterprise SaaS, the ability of the Indian engineering talent is terrific. And so we often see companies that are by country. So one of our biggest winners, a company called Icertis, started in Seattle, sort of a spin out of Azure, with the tech team in Bangalore. And they operate in both places and they sell everywhere. And we see a lot of companies that are technology based in India for SaaS kinds of things or for healthcare, and marketing based in other parts of the world, Europe, the US, other parts of Southeast Asia. And that is growing. And I think India is kind of where China was in the 2005 through 10 period, when it was just breaking out, when the government regulations were coming down, when you could actually start companies and be supported by the government and not be seen as an enemy of the government. That's all happening in India. The corruption has been eased tremendously. One of the things Prime Minister Modi did is a pretty strong anti-corruption stuff, and that's been very positive. And so we think India is great, and we also think Indonesia, with almost 300 million people, and again, a couple of 100 million cell phones, is a market that's just coming out of the dark ages, if you will, and moving and sort of leapfrogging the old technologies and coming right into new technology. We've backed some fintech companies there, marketplace companies. It's wide open, and there's good talent there. And we also think we're getting into this tripolar world that Tony talked about, which is to say, yes, you have the US, yes, you have China, but as opposed to Europe being the other piece, you really have the Middle East, because that is where capital is, and that is where a thirst for moving jobs and technology is. And the Middle East is a pretty big place. You have a couple of 100 million plus population countries like Egypt, and then you have the whole Gulf area, which is bringing in and willing to use its capital to bring in really good talent and help them build companies that can scale across the region and scale across the world. And that is something that China has found it hard to do. What China is great at is engineering. And I'm talking about the mainland, not so much Hong Kong, which has a lot of other strengths. And what we were talking with Kai-Fu Lee in Beijing, and he said he's building some new AI companies, and what he wants is the scientists in Palo Alto and the engineering in China.
Yeah.
Because he can hire 10 times as many engineers for 10 engineers for the price of one Palo Alto scientist. But the great science is coming out of the US, the great engineering is coming out of China. Yeah. Now, he understands that he may not be able to sell into the US initially because of this issue. And geopolitics moves in waves. So I think the next couple of years are going to be very tough. I think post-US election, depending on what happens, it could be worse or it could be better. And we won't know until January 2024 and see what January 2025 rather, and see what happens.
Yeah, thank you, Howard. Speaking of which, I think my previous startup was exactly like that, where I was part of a company called Everstream. We're working out of a garage for a few years, but later we grew. The core team is Silicon Valley, San Mateo based, and then we have 80 engineers in China. And we just ballooned. We raised 80 million, eventually sold it to Dun & Bradstreet, right? For these type of 0 to 1 experiences, I mean, everyone here wants to be part of that story, right? We wanted to be part of a global enterprise, right? What do you think about the idea, right? Today, you have top engineers coming out of Silicon Valley, but you have, salespeople, marketing all over the world. It seems like it's almost necessary for every company if you want to be a multi-billion-dollar company. Do you think that's also where we're shifting, or where do you see how company building has changed since the geopolitical issues?
Well, I think it's not just geopolitics, it's COVID. So the notion of virtual companies is now completely accepted. It's not necessarily the best way to do things, but it's definitely accepted that you can have your key C-suite staff in multiple locations. You can certainly have your engineers anywhere in the world. You can find great engineers all over the world and have them anywhere. And you need sales and marketing teams that are local and that are localized for whatever country. And that is now accepted. Now, the question will be, in some industries, you're going to need to locate those engineers outside of China, because some of the US companies who want to invest will find it difficult to invest in Chinese engineering. They'll have to invest in engineering in Latin America, in Eastern Europe, or in the Middle East, or in India. But that's the way we're going.
Yeah, we also noticed that quite a few Chinese entrepreneurs have left China. This is a pretty recent trend. Before you might see a lot of companies, building China, sell to the US. But today you see a lot of entrepreneurs, at least for us, we have been investing in Chinese entrepreneurs in Africa, in Latin America. Some of them actually call, the Congo their homeland, right? But they're building companies that are selling to the world. I mean, one of our portfolio company, TikTok, Musically, the initial company was actually built in China, but sold to the US because they said, well, the Chinese kids between age 14 and 17 don't have the time to look at short form videos all day. So guess where we go? So from there, right, I think my question is, what do you guys think about the global workforce? And also, how do you think about investments? Because the rapidly declining Chinese economy, right, maybe at one point it was seen as US, China being the, hopefully, I wouldn't say number 2, but, basically overtaking US as a potential competitor. But now it's not even that case. According to Bloomberg, what do you think is the effect for global investors? How should investors reposition their portfolio given this latest change?
Okay, so I'm not an economist, so I don't know how to predict, whether China is going up or down. I read the newspaper, try to follow it. The latest thing is that, maybe China's economy is bottom out. I don't know. Nobody knows really. But I wouldn't count China out. Okay, I think that would be a very dangerous strategy. I think I want to address the point about the key thing is, what does it take to have a successful, technology-based economy? So you need money, which you look at where the money, right? So China has, Middle East has, US has. You need talent. That's really the most important. You need the brain, and this goes with the population. And right, so China certainly has it. So you need the market. Even though China is number 2 in population, it's still pretty big, right? What is it? 1.4 billion people. That's more than the US and Europe combined. And I have to add, just my little anecdotal experience is that market is very competitive and innovative. It's not just all copycats. Okay. I always remind people, I have both WhatsApp and WeChat. I've used them for a long time. The thing where you can scan the QR code, which, by the way, most WhatsApp users do not even know exists. Has been in WeChat for over a decade. So you can see who innovates, right? So because given the size of the market, given the user, given the youth, it naturally leads to innovation. TikTok was just one example. But I think the key doubt that many people have is, given the political system in China, can the system innovate? That I think is the key question. I don't know the answer, but there are many examples that shows that there's no predetermined condition where any part of the human population cannot innovate. When the incentives are there, when the pressure is there, and people would innovate. You look at history. I think that's the biggest bet. Okay. For example, I mentioned about semiconductors. So can China innovate and create its own semiconductor industry? Right now, it cannot, because its supply chain has been cut off, right, immediately. But I don't know in the future. One last point I want to make. The U.S. has always been built upon the secret sauce, so to speak, of the American system is that you have talent from around the world that U.S. can gather, attract. That has always been the case. And in fact, you need to look no further than we're on Zoom, right? Am I right? Well, I think we're on Zoom. Well, Zoom's founder is a Chinese immigrant. You look at semiconductor, NVIDIA, TSMC, all founded by Chinese immigrants to the U.S. And many, many more examples. So I think, as I go back to Blinken's quote, I think, we need to cooperate where we can. And it's for the benefit of, I think, the U.S. system. That's how I feel. Cathryn, you mentioned about people leaving the company. I don't know that. I don't know whether it's a long-term phenomenon or just short-term. I think that depends on the economic condition.
I think that's a really interesting point you just pointed out. We actually recently saw an interview. I believe it was the CEO of Lux Capital, Josh Wolf. He talked about how if the U.S. wasn't so, I guess at the time a little bit discriminative against the founder of TSMC, we would have had a Texan company because the guy was working Texas for many, many years. Unfortunately, he was unfairly treated because they called this the bamboo ceiling. That happens in America quite a bit. I think all of us Asian Americans growing up with this very clear idea that it's going to happen to us. So that's why people go global. And how do you guys see, with now what's going on between US and China, how do you see sort of the Asian American population, right? Like, what can we do to encourage people to stay here and actually innovate here?
Well, I think we're seeing two things. One is I agree with what Tony said. The U.S.'s current immigration policy is a disaster. There's no question about that. But if you look at who's running Microsoft, who is running Google, it's the Desi community, Indian immigrants that came in and grew up here. And one of the issues with China, by the way, is demographics. The birth rate is way too low. It's low here, but it's very low in China. It's under 0.9 right now. You need 2.1 to replace the population. So it is shrinking. The population is aging. That will work slightly against the innovation in society. And the U.S. is a little more stable in terms of that. We're not. Western Europe is much worse off also. So that's
because of immigrants, right, Howard? Part of it is because of immigration.
Part of it's immigration because we're not adding the immigration to keep our population growing the way it would normally grow. And contrary to what the fearmongers have you think about, almost all the immigrants are here for good reason and very quickly become educated, and the next generation becomes much better off economically. So that is something we need. But for the Asian American population, there's been amazing growth. Now, people in Congress, we're finally at that point where the prejudices don't go away completely, but they're much more muted than they used to be. And the fear of China may bring those back up again. We saw that happen during World War II to the Japanese, unfortunately. But I think we'll be okay. And we have seen some backlash with Chinese Americans working in security in areas being unfairly targeted. So that has to calm down a bit, and that'll take a little bit of time.
Great, thank you both. So lastly, before we end the session, I want to ask, right, as we're in a room of investors here, what do you guys think are the most important issues right now facing geopolitical, and also as an investor, how do you navigate this kind of muddy sea, right? We talked about Saudi Arabia, we talked about, in the previous sessions, we covered a little bit about energy transition, and with the Russian-Ukrainian war, natural resource conflicts. What do you think are the key tenets you want us to keep in mind going forward when it comes to investing?
Well, I think we always have a large variety of things that come to us, opportunities, and that's going to continue no matter what happens overall geopolitically. We're going to see companies in India and China and so on, and they'll be in some of those key areas, the energy transition. They'll be in the largest economic expenditures, which are healthcare and education around the world. And we don't see that stopping anything. We do see you have to be careful. You can't invest in education in China because the Chinese government is too concerned about it. They had 400 million people learning English, and then they shut down all the online education because Xi Jinping felt they were learning English, but with American value systems. So he wanted to stop it for 2 years and rebuild the materials so that they learned it with the Communist Party value system. That's restarted now, but it means there's a group that didn't really learn as much English as they need to compete in the world scene. So we have to deal with some of those things.
Tony?
Yeah, I want to remind all my friends, often, is that the world is actually very big. The world is bigger than the West or China alone. People use the term global South. The global South has a different kind of concern. They have different needs. They want to develop their own countries, and they have aspirations. So I think the business investment opportunity will always be there. It's not always just American company going to China, right? Chinese money can also go elsewhere. And I think that's really, the future, if we take a positive outlook about markets being satisfied, where resources are put in the right use, the potential is limitless. I think the less barrier, the better. I think that's how I see it. As I mentioned before, this is a great time for savvy investors who can read the tea leaves, so to speak, of the political, technological, and the future of the world, and put your money where the opportunities are, and you'll be ahead of the rest of the crowd. By the way, that goes for the entrepreneurs too. That goes for that too. Okay. So
yeah,
thank you.
I also saw firsthand how that worked. When we went to Riyadh in 2019, that was my first time visiting Saudi Arabia. I was able to somehow fund a couple companies that have received incredible funding from PIF. One of which said their welcome gift was 20 million, just establish an office, we'll welcome you, and boom, right there. So all of a sudden, when you go to parts of Riyadh does feel like China. I don't know if you guys felt that way. It's like LA on one, it's like a quarter, right? Yeah. One quarter is like LA. Another quarter felt like China 30 years ago. So, the comparison and also what type of people they draw for entrepreneurs, for expeditioners who want to go there and establish and build from the ground up, right? That's why there's so much energy and excitement around that area. So with that, thank you guys both. Sorry, Tony, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just want one more thing to add. Nobody has mentioned BRICS yet. As you heard, that's a big development. Saudi Arabia has been invited. I don't think it has joined yet. Okay, you can see that's happening. So the last thing I want to say is, Saudi Arabia is a good example of where different nations, different countries, different people have their own aspirations. So I would say that the current Saudi leadership is trying to lead a Arabic renaissance. The Arab world was very much a center of world civilization 1,000 years ago, but it has gone downhill for the last 500 years. That's it. really very much try to do this. So this is Saudi Arabia's aspiration, the Arab world's aspiration. Nothing wrong with that, right? So whether they will be successful or not, are different. But they have their own aspiration, and they have to balance between the different demands on them. So, for example, Saudi Arabia announced maybe 2-3 weeks ago that every school children in high school or K-12 have to spend 2 hours a week learning Chinese. It tells you something.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you guys, and really appreciate our panelists, Professor Tony Chen, Howard, and really please stay. We're going to have dinner afterwards, and hopefully you all get to meet our esteemed guests here. Thank you so much.
I can't be there with you in person.
Thank you.
Thank you.